Pardon the shade, sun's still in my eyes, but I want to just kind of go over a couple of things and to kind of give everybody a couple of brief reminders. So reminder one, you're going to want to distrust. And when I say distrust everything you see, hear, and read in American news and about American foreign policy. And the reason I say that is because you end up with the harsh recognition that the majority of the stories you're told to care about in American media are distractions from what the real difficulties are of this country. They briefly mention inflation in a passing glance. They mention Ghislaine Maxwell, and for those who don't know, that is Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator, paramour, second in command, Girl Friday, whatever you want to use for a turn of phrase. But she's on trial the 29th, and we're all worried about other things. We're worried about a missing girl in Utah. We're worried about a political protest gone wrong, or an escalation in Wisconsin. Or we're worried about another thing. The point being, we're told to worry about these things. We're pushed these things frequently, and they're very carefully designed to hit whatever hot buttons we might have regarding certain issues. That way it gets us to pay attention more, right? There's an old news saying that I learned in my journalism class in high school: if it bleeds, it leads. And what that translates to is that they want the most scandalous, salacious stories out in front. The genuine stories that would help people's lives or that would bring people awareness, people don't give a shit about. And when I say people, I mean the scumbags who run, this country. Point being, think very, very critically about every story you're hearing out of U.S. media and about the U.S. We have significantly more important stories down the pipeline. Again, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is here. We have inflation, and you have to really start paying attention of who gets put in power, in charge of the Federal Reserve or in charge of this specific bank or that specific bank. Why? Because, well, as much as I hate to say it, this is a capitalist country. And, well, that's a large part of the problem. It also puts everything in perspective. When you realize that, as a wise Russian said, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, everything starts clicking together. You start becoming more aware of everything around you, and everything that has gone on in your generation or our lives or anything like that. My generation, I'm a millennial. My generation went through, I was born during the first Gulf War, and then my entire generation went through Iraq War II and the war in Afghanistan. And even that's not fully finished. And now we have to deal with all the fallout and destabilization. That doesn't get into the United States destabilizing multiple other countries via sanctions like they do with Cuba, via overthrowing dictators like they did in Guatemala up until very recently. Now there's an attempt at making things better like they did in Nicaragua, like they did in a host of other countries, even Germany back in the Cold War days. So the point being, when you recognize that the majority of our social issues are in reality a symptom of capitalism, and I literally mean that. I mean racism. I mean sexism. I mean whatever social issue you have that's bothering you, so to speak, or that's very affecting your life. Honestly, 9 times out of 10, this is a symptom of capitalism, and sounds like a vaguely reductionist take, but it needs to be said. Quite frankly, this is a country that is currently an empire, that is currently the arbiter of world financial capitalism at this point, along with a certain other country that the U.S. sends billions of dollars to, that, in reality doesn't exist. But the point being, again, distrust what you see in the media. Distrust what you see in the media. And the second thing, the majority of the social issues you face boil down to capitalism, right? Cecil Rhodes, in the 18th, 19th century, I believe, said something to the effect of, in order to basically suppress domestic rebellions, in order to stop the workers from maintaining their rights, England, because he's a British man, England would have to go to other countries and extract the resources, extract the wealth, extract the cheap labor, and bring them to England, or use them for the benefit of England, or however that shook out. And why is that relevant to today? Because you see it frequently. You see the way France brought in a slew of Algerians as cheap labor. You see it through the decades of Central American migrants being brought here for cheap labor. And that's literally what the point of the border policy is. It's cheap labor for capitalists. And nowhere did that solidify more for me than during Trump's presidency, ironically enough, when there was a chicken farm in, I believe it was Mississippi, one of those places around the Midwest. And, there was a big hullabaloo made about busting, 200 illegal immigrants and deporting them back, presumably to Mexico. And there was no mention of the person who hired them. There was no mention of the person who lured them in with promises of work, but then called immigration the second they asked for their pay. There's no mention of any charges being brought against the business owner for hiring illegal immigrants. There's no charges there's no talk of, anything of any consequence happening to that business owner, to that businessman, right? So you have these workers who, regardless of whether you want them here or not, they were here. They were brought here. They were lured here. They were attracted here by the promise of work, because their country was so destabilized by U.S., policy that they have no choice but to get up here, right? So the point being, the worker only gets hurt whenever the capitalist screws up. It's never the capitalist. It's never the rich. It's never the bourgeois. It's always the working class. Again, it's never the capitalist. It's never the rich. It's never the bourgeois that pay for the societal issues they create. Never is. And once you realize that, you realize that a lot of things in this country was by design. And unfortunately, it was never designed for the working man. It was never designed for the improvement of people's lives. It was always designed to keep them in a state of permanent oppression. And I literally mean economic and financial oppression, an economic and financial boot on the neck of the working class. And nowhere was that more encapsulated than during the pandemic, regardless of your thoughts on it. You have to really admire a government that claims to care about its people, but the immediate first thing it does is dump trillions into Wall Street. That is not an exaggeration. 1.5 trillion was dumped in a day into Wall Street to save it. But they've been telling us for decades we can't have universal health care. They've been telling us for decades we can't have a universal basic income. They've been telling us for decades we can't have the infrastructures, right? They've been telling us for decades that, we can't bring back manufacturing jobs in this country. They've been telling us for decades, just go to college. We're a service sector economy now. Why is that? Simple. The capitalists shipped the jobs. They took the factories. They took the supplies. They took the knowledge and they sent it to other countries. They sent it to China. They sent it to Vietnam. They sent it to India. They sent it to Central and South America, which is, again, connects back to why all the Central and South Americans are flooding the border. If you're, conservatives tend to say, we care about the borders and things like that. No, you don't. No, you don't. If you did, you would recognize that capitalism is the root cause of why these people are coming in droves, right? Why the wage floor for American workers of all colors, stripes, and backgrounds is being suppressed and pushed down, right? Wages haven't gone up since the 70s. They've remained flat, and I mean literally flat. We're getting paid with the same wages that we were paid in the 70s, all the while inflation currently is making everything go up. Now, why is inflation suddenly coming in? Well, the main reason is businesses want to make a profit. Businesses want to make money, right? There are problems they have. They want to pass the cost on to you and make whatever money that they want. Think about that. Inflation happens because the government doesn't want to put a price freeze. Inflation happens because if you believe in the aspect of printing money that causes inflation, inflation is now caused because of Wall Street, because of the bailouts, because the airlines got bailed out, the banks got bailed out, Wall Street got bailed out. But these same people will then turn around and say, an extra $300 to $600 a month in unemployment pay, $600 a week, in unemployment pay is somehow hurting the economy. No, it isn't. You could literally pay everybody $3,000 a month right now, right here, every single man, woman, and child in this country, and it would still be cheaper than what you bailed out Wall Street with. And this is what we're facing, ladies and gentlemen. It's a class war. It's always been a class war, no matter how much they're trying to make about racism, sexism, so on and so forth. It is the rich versus the poor, the same as it ever was. Think about that. I'll be around.